cameras off and your mics off for the entire time until we get to the end, and then feel free to turn your picture, your cameras on at that time. I'm Roger Roscoe. I'm the Tampa chapter coordinator. We have with us tonight also is Kim Fuller from the California chapter and Tiffany Barfield from the New York City chapter. And all three of our chapters have come together to host tonight. I'd like to welcome a couple of other very special guests that we have. We have former Cabinet Secretary and Chief of Staff Andy Card with us tonight, and former Cabinet Secretary Krista Nelson, and former time Ambassador Mel Sembler, and former Communications Director Kevin Sully Sullivan, calling from the. I want to welcome all of our alumni and guests from across the country. Thank you all very, very much for coming on tonight. We are honored to have Mr. Mark McKinnon, the legendary campaign veteran who served as the chief media strategist for President Bush and for Senator John McCain. He's also the creator, the producer, and the co-host of the real-time documentary series The Circus on Showtime, which aired again last night. This was the highest rated non-scripted show in the history of Showtime, now entering its. We're going to have some great stories tonight from Mark, some insights, some other unique things that may come up during the way. So Mark, welcome. Thank you very much for attending tonight.
Hey, Roger, thanks for having me. This is Old Home Week. Lots of friends and colleagues from over the years here tonight. And, you know, it's been so many people on this call have been such a big part of my life, and so many chapters and stories that we all share. So it's really great to be with you all tonight.
Well, thanks, Mark. We're honored for you kicking off this series here. We've had some successful series this last year, and we're glad, honored to have you as a part of this tonight. So, Mark, for some of our guests who are with us tonight, some of them may not know what a chief media strategist is. Strategist, Mark?
Well, my mother's still trying to figure it out, Roger. She keeps asking me what it is I actually do. Hello, Chief. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
How are you?
Hello, Andy. Welcome.
Great to see you, Andy. Great to see you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time tonight and honoring us, being on us, sir.
I'm struggling with my computer, I'll be honest with you. But that's one of the challenges of living in rural New Hampshire. Where
you're looking good, though, Chief. You're looking good.
Well,
so, Roger, in answer to your question, it's there's lots of ways that you could go about talking about what a media guy is or a media advisor. But the reality is that in today's politics, that it's not enough to be the smartest candidate or the most experienced candidate. The candidates who win in the modern era are candidates who can communicate well. They're candidates who can create a narrative about their campaign and create a story and create a compelling story that draws voters into the campaign. So, you know, I'm an old bad songwriter. I'm an old hack journalist. And I ended up doing some campaigns, and then I started a TV show. The thing that all those things have in common is storytelling. And so, I mean, the great thing about working for Governor Bush, then President Bush, was, as you all know, he was very clear about his vision, very clear about what he believed in, but he also knew what he didn't know. And one of the things that he said he didn't know was media. He said, listen, I've got a real clear idea about what I believe and what I want to say. I just want you to help me figure out how to say it. So you do your job and I'll do mine, and it'll all work out well. And it did.
Excellent. Can you reflect back on that time when you met then Governor Bush? I think it was at a restaurant or at a dinner. Can you kind of tell us that experience?
We both landed in Austin, Texas in the mid-'90s. I had ironically worked for Ann Richards. And I think I'm the only person in the universe that worked for both Ann Richards and George W. Bush. It's a singular cohort. But I had worked in, before George Bush came to town, Texas was a two-party state. You were either a conservative Democrat or a progressive Democrat. There really weren't Republicans in Texas. In fact, in 1990, when Ann Richards was elected, all 28 statewide offices were Democrat. But then but a lot of Democrats like me were, pretty conservative and not entirely comfortable with a lot of the positions of the Democratic Party, particularly the National Democratic Party, which was kind of infecting Texas. And then this guy came to town, George W. Bush, with this great idea about compassionate conservatism. And that appealed very much to people like me. And so suddenly we had an alternative. And so lots of people like me and Rick Perry and lots of others who were Democrats for years in Texas crossed the bridge thanks to George W. Bush. And we had kind of run in some similar social circles. And I had been working on a charter school effort. And a mutual friend of ours invited us to dinner. And we had a dinner with about 8 of us and the governor. And we got to talking about this charter school movement, and he got really interested in it, and then went on to do a bunch of policy initiatives for charter schools in Texas. But then we really became friends socially before professionally. We had daughters about the same age, and we both loved to run, and so we started running together until his knees gave out and my back gave out, and then we started riding mountain bikes. But as I said, it was very much a social kind of connection. And then the re-elect in '98 came around, and the then governor's media person, got in some legal trouble, and they were on the lookout for somebody to fill the slot. And I knew Karl Rove very well. I knew Bob Bullock, the lieutenant governor, really well, who was very close to George W. Bush, even though he was a Democrat, even though his godson ran against George W. Bush. He endorsed George Bush over his godson. That's how strongly he felt about George W. Bush. So that was Bob Bullock. So there were people in the governor's orbit who said, listen, why don't you talk to McKinnon about doing this? And so we did. And as I said, I crossed the bridge and took a little heat from the partisans, but it's a decision I never regretted.
Excellent. Do you have any media pieces that stick out in your mind from the first campaign that, just blew you away?
Well, I'll tell you a story if I guess we have a little bit of time. This is a little bit of a longer story, but it's one where I know a lot of you who've worked on these presidential campaigns know that it's like a human microwave. I mean, you're basically on full stress for, usually a period of a couple of years. And there's very few times when you feel like it's really kind of on your shoulders that to either get it through or screw it up. And there was one time when that happened to me, and it was right after New Hampshire in 2000. Many of you will painfully remember that we had gone from front runner to losing New Hampshire by 18 points. And we went into South Carolina, and it was do or die. There was no question that if John McCain won South Carolina, he was going to be the next president, and that we had to revive the campaign then. But there was kind of a disarmament pact in place, which was that both John McCain and George W. Bush had said that they would not do any negative advertising against each other. And so McCain is ahead in South Carolina. There's not many days left, and suddenly, I think it's one of the great strategic mistakes of John McCain's career, he went negative on George W. Bush, and he compared then Governor Bush to Bill Clinton, which is about the biggest insult that you could hurl at Governor Bush. And so Governor Bush said, sick 'em boys after that, and we unloaded on McCain, mostly to say that it was just out of line that he compared George W. Bush to Bill Clinton, but it allowed us to fire, and we had to track down the governor in South Carolina in the middle of nowhere and get him to go over a script, and shot the script. And there were about 5 times that day where I didn't think we were going to make it, and we had to redo the spot. And then the film almost got ruined in security at the airport, but we got it up just in time with just a few days left in South Carolina. And there's no question that contributed at any rate to the outcome in South Carolina, and then the rest was history. But it was the one time I could say in the many years of working for George W. Bush where I was really nervous, because I said, McKinnon, you cannot screw this one up, or else we're all going home, and nobody wants to go home.
That's great. I just want to remind everybody, please make sure if you have any questions, please go ahead and get them in the chat. We want to make sure that we get to as many questions as we can. I've been sent several questions already via text for some individuals who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, or they just felt more comfortable sending that in. So I know you are very honored to bestowed a nickname from President Bush, which not many of us can say that they have that. I believe he's called you MCAT.
Yeah, that's a device that that the president employs, and I get it as I get older because I have less and less a facility to remember names, and it's easier if you can kind of tag somebody with a nickname. And I think that that's really mostly why he adopted so many nicknames. It's just easier to remember people. And I was kind of I was a runaway during high school. I ended up in Nashville as a songwriter, so I was kind of the beatnik of the Bush crowd. And if anybody remembers Jay Carney, Jay was a Time magazine reporter, went on to be Obama's press secretary, and now works for Amazon. And Carney was doing a feature piece on the president in the campaign in probably in '99, and he wrote a little kind of takeout on all the staff members, and that's when the president dubbed me MCAT when he was talking to the president about me, and he said, "That's MCAT," and the MCAT comes from uh, again sort of because I was the beatnik. There's an old beatnik term called the people used to say he was the hepcat, but instead of the hepcat, I was the MCAT, the Mark cat. So he calls me and my daughters MCAT and the M kittens.
Excellent. That's great. And to this day, I'm sure when you do see each other and you speak, I'm sure then the nickname still comes out. So.
Oh, it has, and it's stuck, and it's what it's what a lot of people still call me now.
Question that came in for you, Mark. Very serious question. They would like to know. So, Mark, how many hats do you have?
If we might, I even took some video today, but I'm not going to slow down the program to try and get our technical side going here. But I took a video of my hat closet. Some people have shoe closets. I have a hat closet, and I'll just go back up. I mean, it is an affectation, but it's not a recently acquired one. My dad wore an open road Stetson, which is this style hat. It's just a thinner brim and this kind of crown, but it's also called the president's hat. It's the hat that LBJ wore, Truman wore, Eisenhower wore it. It's just a kind of a gentleman's version, a little more formal version of a Western hat. And, my dad had all this cool stuff in his closet, and I used to climb around in it like young kids do. And there's lots of cool stuff, but the coolest thing in there was his Stetson, and I couldn't wait till I was old enough to have my own. And sure enough, as soon as I got my own Stetson. But now I've got more than I'd be embarrassed to tell you how many I actually have. Put it that way.
Well, that's your trademark. I know. I don't think if we saw you without it, I'm sure we probably wouldn't recognize you. So.
Well, it's very practical in that sense. Like if I'm in airports or whatever, to just say look for the guy with the hats. But I will say this: I probably have more hats than Imelda has shoes.
We've got a question here from Susie D. Like George W. Bush, can the GOP governors today help build the future agenda of the party?
Yeah, sure. I think often the agenda often does come from the states. I mean, George W. Bush was a good example of that when he was governor of Texas. And I think given all that's happened and given how much kind of analysis will be done and self-reflection in the Republican Party over the next couple of years, that people will be looking more than ever to the states for leadership, for ideas. I mean, clearly there's going to be a real reckoning in Washington and on the sort of national Republican front about where the party is and where it goes from here. And I think a lot of the answers will come from the states. And, those governors who, once again, it's the people who are closest to the ground that get it. And because they're hearing directly from constituents, the real laboratories of democracy are in the states. So I think that the party would be wise to look to the governors around this country to look for where the Republican Party goes in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Susie, for that. David Hill, last night on the circus, you were at the rally on the Ellipse on Wednesday. What was it like being there in person?
Well, it was a very typical, in some ways, a very typical Trump rally in the sense that people were, well, I'll back it up even more. The first time I went to a Trump rally was in Arizona in 2015, and late 2015. And it's the first one that I went to, and I knew something very different was happening even then. It was something different than that I had ever seen before in politics. I mean, It was in Arizona. It was over 100 degrees. It was in the middle of the day, and people were lined up for miles. And so I'm sure a lot of people on this call have been to Trump rallies, and you know what I'm talking about. But they're completely different. It's not a typical political event, and it's a cultural event, and it's a tribal event. And so, having been to a number, this was very much like that. But people were more animated than ever, Roger, and they were mad. And that mix of anger and dedication, you could tell at the rally that there was potential for trouble. And in fact, if you'd been there as I was, you're not surprised. You're not. I mean, you're certainly surprised by the extent of what happened, but you're not surprised that people marched to the Capitol because that's what Donald Trump asked them to do. I mean, he said, "Let's go march down Pennsylvania Avenue." So, certainly that was not his intent, but that's certainly what some people heard. And that's the danger of that kind of dedication and loyalty, and just given the times that we're living in, and so it was a tragic week for all of us. But as I said, I would have been surprised, really, having been at that rally, if there hadn't been some sort of disturbance, seriously problematic demonstrations, because just all the elements were there.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Question from Colleen. Again, anybody, please go ahead and get some questions in the chat. We're doing the questions here. What has happened to the Republican Party? How did we become the party of QAnon and conspiracy theorists?
Well, I mean, we'll be writing books about this for years and years and years and analyzing it. And it's it didn't start with Donald Trump. We talk about the evolution of so many things in our society, from talk radio to cable television to the internet, where people are able to silo information and get exactly the kind of it's not like everybody's watching the same three networks like Chief Card and I did back in the 60s. They're all getting information, and a lot of it is designed to be what we call confirmation bias. It just confirms things that we already think, or expands things that we already think, and doesn't give us kind of any alternative information. So, it became the Trump party, no question about that, and that's in many ways different than the party of George W. Bush. But we have to acknowledge that he tapped into a lot of anxiety that was happening in this country, and we need to understand why that happened. And people came to distrust their government, distrust their officials, and believe that they were being left behind. And so that's a symptom that needs to be really looked at by, again, however the Republican Party sorts itself out in the future, whether it goes back to a compassionate conservative party or more Trump-like, we'll see. But there's some deep divisions within the country that allowed somebody like, or welcomed and invited somebody like Trump to tap into it and take advantage of it.
Sure. Thank you. Question from Gary. With a new president coming in, can we expect the national media to return to their traditional role of a watchdog, or at least assume a more challenging role with their reporting?
Well, here's the one thing that I think is going to happen is that as critical as the media has been and are of Donald Trump and Republicans generally, I'll say there's just a bias there. I think that they're going to be surprised by the extent to which they're unhappy with Joe Biden. And when I say that, I mean, because it's going to go back to a very traditional kind of press White House, which is much more formal, and there's just going to be a lot less access to the president. I mean, you say what you want about Donald Trump, he was incredibly accessible, right? Now, it's not like he was doing, he wasn't coming into the press briefing room and doing daily briefings, but he was either at the helicopter at Marine One or whatever venues it was. He talked a lot to the press, and I remember a press event I went to in the East Room one time with the president, and it was just an amazing deal because I forget the circumstances or the timing, but he came out and it was a room full of however many reporters you could fit in there. The advanced people on the call would know, but there were 150 press, easy, and And he could have come in there, and I'll say it, our old boss probably would have come in. Well, he probably wouldn't even have gone in, but if he did, he would have done it for 5 minutes, and then he would have been out of there. And Karl Rover, Karen Hughes would have said, okay, you call on these 5 people who are friendly reporters. And Donald Trump, to his credit, he went on for an hour and a half. And I mean, I timed it. I just could not believe it. And not just an hour and a half, but he was not only talking to friendly reporters, he was talking to people that he knew would be unfriendly. And I think he was doing it on purpose because he wanted to show the combat with some of these reporters. And then what was even more astonishing to me is I know that he was calling on reporters who he had no idea who they were. I mean, that's incredibly fearless for any politician, right? I mean, and there's some nut jobs in the press corps, so God knows who he was calling on. And by the way, I it's for another conversation, but it's the chief. Maybe we'll talk sometime about all the people that they allow into the Washington White House press corps. It's astonishing to me some of the characters they get in there that are designed to just drive the press secretary and the president crazy.
Thank you. Question from from Ron Castleman. Has the media been fair during the last 12 months?
During the last how many months?
12 months.
Oh, 12 months.
12 months. Yes.
Oh, boy. Fair. No. I mean, I think, first of all, I think one of the great consequences, whether it doesn't matter where you are on the political dial, has been sort of the death of truth, the death of facts over the last number of years. And, if you can't work from a common set of facts, it's pretty hard to have any kind of a legitimate, constructive dialogue in the media. And so, the problem is what we've seen is that in the race for ratings that since people don't share audiences anymore, they carve out their own and they just feed them whatever they want to hear. And so is it fair? No, it's not. And I think it's mostly unfair to consumers of that news because they're not getting the truth. And so, that I think is going to be one of the greatest challenges for the country and our society is how do we get back to a place where Americans generally have a shared sense of the truth. What can we believe about Washington and our institutions? Man, we got a lot of work to do. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Mark. Kevin wants you to get your crystal ball out at the airport. And Kevin's question is, what comes next for the GOP?
Well, I'll say a couple things about that. One is I predicted, not that it took, not that I was any Nostradamus, but I was surprised that not many people were saying it before the election. And I wrote a column about this back in September. And I said, listen, I'm not going to go out on a limb to say whether Donald Trump's going to win or lose. I think the way things are going, it's looking tough. But if he does lose, I think he's going to turn right around and say he's running for president in 2024. And, there'd been a lot of articles before that about Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz and even Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. And I was like, wait a minute. Donald Trump ran, he didn't even think he was going to be president, but he knew it was like the hottest spotlight in the world. If you want to get media attention, run for president. And that's what Donald Trump loves and craves. And so the notion that he would willingly give that up to anybody, much less his kind of his substantial significance in the Republican Party. I mean, there's a lot of different opinion about Donald Trump, but I'll say prior to this week anyway, he had the highest rating in any party, Democrat or Republican, for any president in the history of the United States, except for George W. Bush right after 9/11. That was, I think he had a 97% approval rating in the party, but Donald Trump had 95, 96. So he is enormously popular within his party, and that shouldn't be discounted. So I thought that he would be mad about losing. He hates to lose. He's going to want revenge, and he's going to want to serve it cold and in person. And so I figured that he would run, very possibly run for re-election, or at the very least say that he's going to maintain that power. I mean, because as soon as you say you're not running, it evaporates overnight. So I think that, but now given the events of last week, I think that that's I still think that's the case. I still think he's going to say he's going to run, but the sort of dominance that he had in the party, I think, is certainly fractured. There's going to be some real divisions now. I think the debate's going to be sharper about the direction of the country. I mean, I think there's going to be strong Trump loyal, so maybe even stronger than before. But there'll be a new faction that will either want to kind of go back or forward in a different direction. And so, I think you're going to have 3 or 4 kind of different, shoots, these green shoots of the Republican Party. One will be Trump dominated. Another could be, kind of an old establishment wing. There could be a brand new version. I'd look for people like Dan Crenshaw, who I think is a real comer in the Republican Party, to be, people to look to new blood like Dan Crenshaw. And then I think you could even see people like coming out of the television world, people like Tucker Carlson could run for president. So I think it's going to be a very challenging time for the party, but it's not going to be as dominated by Donald Trump as it was 2 weeks ago.
Right. Thank you. And again, everybody, please go ahead. Any questions, get them in the chat. We're doing real nicely here and rolling through these. So we'll get to your question, those of you who have put something in. So please continue to type those up. From David Myers. Given the Trump movement and the Republican efforts to object to the Electoral College vote, what responsibilities do media strategists have accepting work? And have you seen more strategists like Mike Murphy, the Lincoln Project, who will work for a pro-Trump candidate? So a 2-card mark.
Yeah, run it by me again, Roger. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
Sure. What responsibilities do media strategists have in accepting work these days, particularly given the Trump movement and the Republican efforts to object to the Electoral College vote that has taken place? That's the first part, sir.
Yeah, well, I've got my own feelings about the whole, trying to overturn the results of the election and the whole issue of voter fraud. It's something I've studied a lot for a long time, and I just believe that one of the big frauds in America is the notion that there's widespread voter fraud. There just isn't. There isn't evidence of it, and 60 court cases in the last month prove that there was no evidence of it.
Sure.
So I think that goes to sort of an obligation to the truth, and I think there were a lot of people that we know who knew better, who were pushing that myth, because it was a myth that served their political interests. And I think there can and should be consequences for that. We cannot be inciting people to believe in some fictional narrative because it serves our political interests. So I think that's the greatest obligation that any of us have, no matter who you're supporting. And listen, that was a real attempt to subvert the institutions of our democracy. And listen, one of the results, or one of the consequences we're seeing already of this last week, and we don't know them all certainly yet. They're just beginning to see the consequences, but we saw that 45% of the current Republican Party endorsed what happened last week. They confirm and they believe that what happened last week was a good thing. That's a problem in my view.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy, for your question here. Tracy Young wants to know, Mark, how can we help educate students and frankly adults about trusted news and civic sources and the differences between opinion TV and fact-based journalism? So how can we educate students and adults these days?
Well, that's a great question, and again, it goes to a much larger question that I think that we need to deal with as a culture and a society, which is, what is truth? Where do we get information? I think that, one of the positive outcomes of the 2016 election was that we really had no idea going into that election just how much manufactured news we were all getting. And when I say manufactured news, I mean like news that teenagers in Eastern European countries were pumping out into the United States internet and getting paid for it. The troll factories coming out of Russia. We didn't understand the extent to which that was happening before the election. We did afterwards. And my hope is that having learned about that, that a lot of people began to question their sources of news. In other words, before I think they were just reading articles like that. They didn't know where they were coming out of Ukraine or Russia, and they just took it at face value. And now I think people are mistrustful about the sources, and when that's a good thing. And what we have to do is get back to getting trusted sources. The other good outcome out of that, Roger, is that there's been a flight to quality. In other words, despite the president's notion that there's a failing New York Times, the New York Times has never been doing better, or the Washington Post, or some of the other leading news organizations in the country. These are kind of the big branded names, but like the Post and the Times, for example, they may have like twice the number of reporters that they had 5 years ago, or certainly twice the number of investigative reporters. Amazon obviously is pouring a ton of money into the Washington Post. So the big branded enterprises, kind of think of any of the sort of big brands, or actually it's kind of a golden era for them. Now, there's a whole nother subject matter to talk about what's happened to local journalism, which is really hurting. But I think that there's more discernment among viewers and consumers of news, and some of the branded companies are doing better work than they've ever done before.
Thank you, Mark. Question came in via text. Question is, Mark, is polling dead?
Kind of seems like it ought to be, right? I've had questions about it for a long time, as I'm sure a lot of you have. And my questions are really kind of just practical, which is that it's pretty obvious that pollsters have a harder time reaching people due to, people just don't have landlines anymore, right? And there's all kinds of, and it's hard to get through on a cell phone. But more to the point, I asked the question, who do you know that answers, a number that they don't know and talks to somebody that they don't know? I mean, my mom might by accident, but nobody sort of my age or younger, I mean, nobody that I talk to would answer a pollster's call and waste 30 minutes of their time talking to a pollster. So then you have to ask yourself the question, well, who is it that's talking to them, right? And because somebody is. We know it's a lot harder for them to get them, but they're getting somebodies. But I don't think those somebodies are representative of the overall population. And that's why I think you're getting really skewed results. And there's certainly the whole thing about whether, Trump supporters, there's sort of the Trump effect that people wouldn't want to admit to pollsters that they support Donald Trump, or they'd be even more sort of crafty than that and tell them, things that they would mislead the pollsters. So we don't have to look any closer. I mean, there was 2016, everybody went crazy over the polling. Then they said, oh, well, we'll fix it in 2020, and it was even worse. So I think that, if it's not dead, it's dying on the vine, and there's going to have to be some new methodologies figured out to fix it in the future. And maybe, again, this may be a situation where there's a good outcome, which is we don't rely on it so much. We'll go to like real reporting on the ground instead of relying on polling, which the media has done way too much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Kim, for your question. In 2014, Mark, you founded No Labels. Can you tell us what success you've had and what challenges, and is there anything we can use that platform in the coming years?
Sure. Yeah, we just had the 10th anniversary, and Nancy Jacobson is a big force in Washington who had this idea, and she used to work for Evan Bayh, senator from Indiana, and lots of others. But she had this idea that there was a voice missing in the middle, which I had complained about for a long time and been a part of a lot of reform efforts and trying to bridge the divide. And here's the interesting thing, Roger. The first sort of version of it didn't work very well, and here's why. Because I thought, there was, as I said, kind of a big voice missing in the middle of American politics, which is to say, I'm socially pretty progressive, but I'm very conservative economically, and that's, I was kind of a Bush Republican, but the reality is that Republicans are there's the way that sort of Tea Party Republicanism went and progressive Democrats, it leaves a lot of people homeless in the middle for that sort of brand of politics. And so we thought we'd create this organization to create a voice to support people in Congress with that kind of a voice. Here's the problem, though. The National Journal, I think, is the magazine that does a biannual report about where there's overlap in Congress between what I call conservative Democrats and progressive Republicans. When they did that study 20 years ago, 224 members of Congress overlapped. In other words, they overlapped ideologically, Republicans and Democrats. The last time they did it a couple of years ago, there were 4 members of Congress who overlapped. That's 200 less than there were 20 years ago. So there was a clear message to us, which was, okay, if you want to be a voice for the middle in Congress, you want to have meetings with all the people in the middle, you're going to be meeting with 4 members of Congress. So that didn't work. And then we just had to recognize that this is not only a polarized country, it's a polarized Congress. And that if we wanted to have a dialogue, we need to bring people of very different stripes together, and that there weren't a lot of people in the middle. And so that's what the organization started doing, and just bringing together Republicans and Democrats who have very different opinions, and just started setting some sort of low-hanging fruit to say, let's work on some, budgetary reform things. We're not going to take on immigration or Social Security, but let's find some things that we can work together. And what we found was that, there's been so much demonizing in politics that when the people actually got in a room together, they were like, oh my gosh, we actually have a lot in common, and we need to stop questioning each other's motives. And so there were lots of things. I mean, listen, I'm not going to suggest to you that they've moved mountains, but there's been a lot of incremental success, and there's definitely a flame. There's a light in the tunnel, and the organization, by the way, now has as its the official caucus in Congress called the Problem Solvers Congress. I think there's like 50 members now, half Republican, half Democrat. And if you think about that, in the current Congress, given the issues that we face, if you can go to an organization that can swing 50 votes, half Democrat, half Republican on any issue, that's a mighty big tool, right? And so they helped break a budget impasse a few years ago with this idea of no budget, no pay, that if you can't pass a budget, you shouldn't get paid, which is a very popular idea. They've been very instrumental in the recent COVID relief discussions. So it's a really powerful force that is I think will be instrumental in the coming years as a way where Joe Biden or Mitch McConnell or whoever can say, listen, I need 50 votes, and that's exactly where I can get them. And these are people who have said and pledged ahead of time that they're going to work together to problem solve. Excellent. And so go to nolabels.org and check it out. It's very well run. It's I'm very proud of what they're doing.
Well, Mark, I've got a very interesting text that came in from Rob Schuler. Rob wants to know.
I got to go.
Wants to know who was a better boss, Joe or Andy?
They both brought strengths to the table. I liked Andy's. Andy had a way to quietly convince you. Joe came in with the whip, but the chief had what I'd call the velvet hammer. Joe just had the hammer.
You led more than I did.
You want to follow up on that, Mr. Secretary?
Most other people lead more than I did. I tried to encourage them to have peripheral vision rather than stuck with tunnel vision. Mark always came in with peripheral vision, so he would understand the context, and not only that, he would understand the context of the consequence, which was even more important, because it's believe it or not, it's really easy to make up policy. It's really hard to understand how that policy would be implemented and to consider all of the consequences to the policy. And frequently you end up with unintended consequences, and they end up defining the policy, and you're in deep trouble.
Well, Roger, that's a great example right there why the chief was such a great leader. And when I look around to people who I think are really good at running the show, they're the people who don't run around screaming and yelling that they demand respect and attention. They just do it quietly and they earn it, like the chief did.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate you following up on that. Another question came in. I think it was just the last day or so, former President H.W. Bush's sister had passed away, Nancy Ellis. Do you have any stories at all that you maybe could share with us, Mark, on your involvement with her at all? Or
Well, I'd say it more broadly, and the chief has been among those like us who've been lucky enough to spend time at the compound, at Kennebunkport, because we all have allegiance and loyalty to members of the Bush family for whom we've had the opportunity to serve. But I think a part of what compels a lot of our loyalty is just their whole sense of family, which is so deep and so strong and so powerful and so compelling. As I said, one of the most moving times for me with the family was at Kennebunkport one night when I was lucky enough to be invited to dinner, and it was kind of a nuclear family and me, and so it was a very extraordinary vantage point to just view the Bush family kind of in their environment, and it was so sweet. And it was Barbara, kind of jumping on George W. for not eating his peas or eating too fast. I think he was eating too fast for sure. That's what it was. And, just kind of the banter back and forth. But the one thing that moved me more than anything was the quiet love between George H.W. and George W. I mean, it was just this kind of unspoken thing. And I felt it viscerally when I was in the room with them, just their kind of looks at each other and the respect that George W. had for H.W. And it kind of almost like moved me to tears almost. So I like excused myself at one point, and I went to the kind of, some other room in the house, and I called my father just because it got me thinking about my own father, and that I hadn't like really told him how much I loved him. And seeing this, the way the Bushes showed their affection for one another just made me realize that I needed to do that more with my own father.
Well, I can say on behalf of everybody on our call and all of our alumni and family and friends, our love and our thoughts and prayers are absolutely being sent out to the entire Bush family on their passing of their family member, their relatives. So I want to definitely go on the record and say that, make it
for sure.
Please keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Absolutely. Another question that came in, they know that you like to eat and drink and enjoy some wonderful establishments across the country. Do you have a favorite restaurant and food that you would like to share with all of us? And maybe we can go visit that place someday once things lighten up out there.
I grew up in Colorado, and Colorado has a weird thing about Texas. Most Coloradans don't like Texans, and it has to do mostly with them migrating up during the winters and taking over the roads, and they don't know how to drive in the snow. And but because of that, I thought that, of all the places I might leave Texas to move to and live in for a big part of my life, Texas might have been 50th on the list. And just for a lot of reasons I won't go into now, but it was actually music that took me to Austin in the early 70s. And I just absolutely fell in love with Texas, and Austin first and then Texas more broadly. I love the history and kind of just the mythology of the place. Everything about it I came to love, but also really came to love the food and really came to love Tex-Mex. And, the thing that's so striking about it to me is that it's so unique and it's so good. And for some reason, it cannot be exported. I mean, I go anywhere in the country and they say they've got Mexican food and it's Tex-Mex, and it's not. It's just, I don't know if it's the air or what it is, but, to get like breakfast tacos in Texas are a thing, and you just can't get them anywhere else. Not like they do in Texas. And I don't know what the combination is, but if you ever get to Texas, and in fact, it's so good now, they actually are exporting a place called Torchy's Tacos out of Texas. And they just came to Colorado, so now I can actually get some real Tex-Mex in Colorado. So I'm thrilled about that. So go check out Torchy's when it comes to town.
Thank you. On our very first Zoom meeting we did back in September, former President Bush's White House photographer, Eric Draper, had a very unique story to share with all of us. On his first day, leaving, I think it was leaving the White House, he accidentally got into the wrong motorcade. So Mark, do you have any experiences or stories to share with us that, we all know motorcades can be quite long. We hope to God you see the sign on there, but any chance that you may have missed your ride at some point?
Oh yeah, no, I missed a flight early on, and that's why I early I came to understand what Bush time means, and as a consequence, I show up to everything in life now at least 15 minutes early, and that's a kind of a discipline that I really kind of appreciate getting from the boss. It's a respect for others' time, and it only took once to learn that lesson. I'll tell you that, as Eric could tell you. But we all talk about being on Bush time, and I've been on Bush time all my life now.
How about you, Mr. Card, Mr. Chief of Staff? Do you have a similar story of the motorcade or missing the flight?
I was left behind under President George H.W. Bush down in New Orleans, where, yes, I was late leaving the event, and I was Deputy Chief of Staff. That was pretty darn embarrassing. And I ended up taking a different plane back to DC, and was embarrassed when I had to get back to the White House and go to the office and said, "Where were you?" But George W. Bush, if you weren't on time, you were late.
Yes.
And the problem was that on time for him was usually 5 or 10 minutes early.
5 minutes
He would
before.
just start.
Yeah. I knew having the pleasure and honor of working advance times, that was instilled upon me very early on. You're going to make sure that everything is ready to go much, much earlier than what it may say on the schedule. So I lived by that. And that's my mantra even to this day in my job. Some of my staff look at me like, it's not the point. We're going to get the job done. So,
well, he also liked to go to bed early, which made it a lot easier for the people who worked at the White House. If you have a president that stays up, goes to bed at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, it's very hard on the staff. My general rule was I could go home when I knew he was going to bed. And thankfully, he really did like to get to bed early. Yep. He also liked to get up early, but I was an early bird, so that worked out all right for me. But no, it was fun to work with the president who recognized the greatest threat to the presidency is wasted time.
Yeah.
And so he was very attentive to the time that it took to do things, and he didn't waste time, and he didn't allow other people to waste time. Far too many presidents waste time, and you can never get it back.
Yep. I know he was very supportive and respectful to the staff, especially during the holidays, not leaving till after Christmas and allowing people to be with their families.
What I used to like about him, he was the first president who had an MBA.
That's right.
So he had a really structured way of making decisions. And I could go to him and I said, "You've got a tough decision to make, a presidential decision to make." And I'd tell him what the issue was. And he would say, "Okay, when does the decision need to be made?" And I'd say, 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months or 2 weeks, whatever it was. And I said, "What do you need to be ready?" And he'd tell me exactly what he would need. But I can think of literally hundreds of times when he would come to me and say, "Isn't today the day I'm supposed to give you an answer on such and such? You told me before I had 3 months to make the decision. The day is here. I'm making the decision." And he had the courage to make a tough decision. He also had the confidence that the decision should be implemented by people who would want to see it implemented. So he had the courage to recognize that his decision alone was not the product. It was actually the decision, and then those who had to implement the decision. And he always prayed that they would implement the decisions to live up to his expectations, because he only had good expectations.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that. We appreciate that. Question from Jennifer Anderson. What type of candidate is going to be a formidable opponent to the Biden-Harris ticket in 2024? And what traits or characteristics will it take, Mark?
Well, it's the mistake that campaigns often make is that they look in the rearview mirror and try and look at the last success and try and replicate it. So I think you'll have a lot of people trying to be the next Donald Trump when Donald Trump, when he won, was not the next anything but himself. So I think that I think there's going to have to be a reinvention, reimagination of what the future looks like. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's going to be somebody like Dan Crenshaw. Crenshaw to me he's got the kind of media savvy. He's kind of the AOC of the right, just in the sense that he's young, he's dynamic, he understands social media really well. I think it'll be somebody like that, or somebody that comes out of, like, it could be a Tucker Carlson coming out of television land. But I think it'll be something kind of new and different, but somebody that certainly understands the power of storytelling and narrative, and like Dan Crenshaw, or somebody from television like Tucker Carlson.
Excellent. Thanks, Jennifer, for that question. Question here: as a media messaging guy, what are your thoughts on big tech's move to censor a sitting president, specifically content and phrases on social networks?
Yeah, I got a big problem with this one, Roger, and I understand the reflex in an environment where you have violence and resulting in mortalities, and you have a fragile sort of ecosystem like we do right now in terms of security, that people can misread, misinterpret information that's out there, or in some cases use it overtly to, as some have in recent weeks, to foment violence. I don't think banning, the president of the United States from a platform is the right response. I really don't. And frankly, whether you're for him or against him, I think it's important to know what the president's thinking, and that's a pretty good X-ray for Donald Trump. And frankly, in the last few days, as he's been off the platform, it makes me wonder what he's thinking. And Twitter was always able to provide that for us. And whether you liked it or not, that was the president's way to communicate. And, so that's going to be a huge debate. But I can tell you right now that among Trump supporters, they are going batshit over that. I mean, because now it is like they're trying to muzzle us. They won't, this is a First Amendment issue. And I think there's going to be consequences for that, that are going to blow back on Democrats and the big tech companies.
Excellent. Mark, text question that came in: what are your thoughts on 2022? Will the Republicans be able to win back the House? The majority.
Well, if 2020 is any sort of headlight, then the answer should be a resounding yes. The fact is that Republicans almost took the House this election. I mean, ultimately only came up about a half dozen short, when everybody assumed the Republicans were going to lose a lot of seats. So the message there is that while the guy at the top lost, the party won, and did really well, particularly in congressional races. So I think there's a very good chance, and this, as the chief knows, and lots of people on this call do, that midterms are almost always bad for incumbent parties and presidents. So, especially if they're only a half dozen short right now, I think there's a good chance that we'll have a Republican majority in the House in 2022.
Chief, would you like to comment additionally?
Yeah, I agree with what Mark said. I do think that the activity that took place this past week really does damage our democracy and our institutions, including the institutions of the parties. Republicans and Democratic parties have both been damaged. So, and I don't know how that's going to play out. The good news is that the next election will be about a lot of different things than what we're talking about right now. So, and I do think the Republicans, because they'll be freer with their voice, because the party out of power at the White House, those voices in Congress can be a little bit louder. And I think that we have a really good chance of retaking the House. But we've got to get over this past challenge. And I really worry, the Bushes were very respectful of the institutions of government and the institution of the two-party system and the institution of democracy. And that's what scares me, is we should all be out there polishing our democracy right now. The world is watching us. And if we're tarnished, they're going to just run away from democracy, and there'll be oligarchs and autocracies and kleptocracies all around the world. So we've got to demonstrate that, you know, the most important word in the Constitution is the first word, we. We've got to get up and start polishing our democracy. It's not up to the people in office. It's up to the people who decide who goes to office.
Well said, Chief.
Yes, thank you, sir. Mark, question. With our Bush-Cheney alumni on this exciting here and across the country, any opportunity for you to be entertaining any auditions for any of us?
Any auditions for the show?
Yes, sir. For
Absolutely.
the award-winning circus.
Yes, anytime. Just hit me at mediaguymark@gmail.com for your cameo appearance. I always love getting for the old team into the show. And listen, by the way, the show was inspired by all my work with President Bush and many of you, when all these great campaigns and seeing what happens behind the scenes, because you know, all those things that, you know, all you advanced people and others who were out on the campaign trail, all the things that we saw that voters don't see, all the behind the scenes stuff. And it's not just the candidate, but it's, you know, it's the Joe Albaughs, it's the Karen Hugheses, it's the you know, it's all the advanced team. There's so many people and players in the orbit of the candidate there that are in many ways as interesting or more interesting than the candidates. And it's interesting, it's entertaining, and it's informative. And you know, so my purpose in creating the circus was to show the behind the scenes scenes of all those things that we've in this call have seen for years and have come to love, and to show the rest of the public what we get to see. And therefore, at the end of the day, have a greater appreciation for what these people go through in the end, and have a better idea and a better respect for the democracy that we've got.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Mark, I know we are up against a hard stop for you. We don't want you to miss your plane.
Well, I'm headed to the border in Texas, where Donald Trump will be tomorrow. I think the idea now is that he has decided in the remaining days left, he wants to try and fly around the country and highlight some of his accomplishments, starting with the border wall in Texas. So I'll be there reporting live from the circus, and we'll be rolled up next Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well, Mark, this was an absolute pleasure. I want to thank everybody who was able to log in tonight and the wonderful questions. I hope we can get you back again in the future, maybe even in person someday. That would be such an honor. And I want to thank Rob Schuler for introducing us to you and you saying yes. It's been fantastic. And I want to thank Jan Gorey for allowing us to use her Zoom link tonight, and Joseph Quintus. Got to meet Joseph via email for handling all the registration. And Tim Fuller and Tiffany Barfield, thank you so much for wanting to co-host this with us. It was an honor. I can continue co-hosting some other events this year. And Sully, thank you as always for promoting us in the Blue Goose. That's an honor. And Steve, thank you for being able to be on tonight and share some insight. Tampa chapter, we hope to continue events like this throughout the year. So any questions that you'd like to see any future, Mr. Card, I hope we can get you sometime later in the year as one of our next speakers. It would be an honor.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting me on the dance card, everybody. Great to see you all. Take care. Bush-Cheney forever.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe and healthy new year, everybody. Again, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Kick it hard, carry on regardless.
All the best.
Safe travels. Everybody. Thank you, Mr. Card.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll see you soon.
Nice job, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah. Appreciate your help. And Jan, thank you very much.
Happy to help.
Maybe 2 months from now, same bat channel.
You never know. Absolutely.
Okay.
Stay
Thanks,
safe.
you guys. Appreciate it. Nice
Stay
job.
safe and stay healthy, everybody.
Have a good
Joseph,
night.
Okay.
thank you. Thank you as always, Jan.
Always happy to help.
Yep.
Thank you all very much.
Absolutely. Rob, enjoy the game tonight.
He may already have jumped
Yeah, he
off.
may have gone bye-bye. So,
Well, that went great.
yes.
Very
Thank you.
enjoyable.
I know you got to, I think, stop recording here at some point. So, so thank you. I'll hang up now and maybe we can see about editing this somehow.